Welcome back to the channel. So I've had the Godzilla to put in Project Bad Decision here for about a year, maybe a little bit more. But finally, the rest of the parts in order to do this swap are starting to arrive. I got a pretty big consignment the other day. Most of the stuff for the actual engine part of this job is here. So let's take a little bit of a look through it, see what we got. If you're going to get a Godzilla to work in a Foxbody like this, the first thing you're going to have to deal with is the oil pan. Yes, the Godzilla's oil pan would probably clear the Foxbody's K-member and steering rack, probably, but it's way too deep. Either you're going to have the engine sitting way high up in the car, which is realistically not an option, or you're going to have to change the oil pan. So there are a bunch of oil pan choices out there. Some of them are modified factory pans. Some of them are fabricated pans. Most of them retain the Ford variable oil pump, which uses a jack shaft underneath. It's a more complicated kind of a setup, and in fact may even be a source of some of the problems with trucks that run Godzillas where they idle for a long time because the oil pressure gets turned down and it starves them. Besides those kind of solutions, Holley offers a complete solution. Now their pan is less expensive than everybody else's pan. And by the way, these oil pans are insanely expensive. Every option you look at here is in the order of 2,000 Canadian dollars. So there's no like $75 oil pan that bolts onto a Godzilla and just works. You've got to really suck it up and spend some money on this. Most of these pans by themselves with just the pan and a pickup, maybe some baffling, cost, yeah, a couple $1,000. This Holley system completely changes everything. It's going to give you a different pan. It's going to give you a different oil pump, which runs off the front of the motor instead of a jack shaft, and that's quite a bit simpler and easier to deal with solution, a little bit more like a GM oil pump setup, I guess, or even like a Coyote. If you go with the Holley solution, you got to go with their whole solution though. So that means different accessory drive, everything has to be different. So that's what this big box is. Now I noticed somebody opened it for me. I've never been in here, so let's get a look at what all we have in the Holley box. This box should really give us everything we need for the oil pan, oil pump, front accessory drive setup, with the exception of it doesn't include a power steering pump. This is their sort of basic setup, and we're going to try and piece together some of these other things as we go along. Because, by the way, their power steering pump is insanely expensive and their alternator is insanely expensive. And we're pretty sure we can do this another way with some less expensive parts that are going to work. So start with the basic kit and we'll see what we got to add. Let's see what all's in here. Well, that there is the oil pump. It's kind of an exciting day. I know it's past Christmas, but I'm not a big fan of tearing stuff open and then losing parts, but let's try and get a feel for where we're at with this, because we're actually getting to the point where we're going to bring that motor around and start upfitting it. So that is your new oil pump setup. My read on the situation is that switching to this style of oil pump actually avoids a whole range of problems, including improving the clearance. Okay, that's probably a pan baffle and pan hardware. And I'm kind of opening this stuff for you guys. It's a triage of the parts, so I know what's here. But, you know, don't bring in a bunch of new parts like this. Open up the boxes, take all the parts out and scatter them around on your workbench, and then lose some little piece that you ultimately need. Well, that thing says, I'm never going to be able to have a baby. Whatever. Let's see what's so dangerous to my reproductive health in this box. That's the only thing that's wrote on it. That looks like the oil pickup tube. That's exactly what that is. That's the oil pickup tube. how that's really dangerous to my reproductive health. I don't know. You guys ever wonder if some of this stuff goes a little bit too far? Crank seal installer tool. So this is a special tool for installing the crank seal. There's a fistful of special tools that are needed on this job. That's one of them. That's an idler pulley. I'm not even going to open that box. Instructions, gasket set, and so on. Some small hardware, plugs, that kind of stuff in here. Some of these gaskets are actually GM gaskets, and some of them are Ford gaskets. Like I said, it kind of switches to a GM style oil pump, and I think that's what that gasket's for. That's a coolant neck for your radiator hoses. I don't know what we're going to do for radiator hoses on this. I think that's its own problem. We'll get to that when we figure out how we're even going to bolt the engine into the car. 100% impeller certificated, it says. Let's see what this is. I would say that that's a water pump. You do have to change all of that stuff when you go with this Holley setup. Oil dipstick Godzilla. That actually looks like a factory part to me. It's factory off of something. So windage tray, it says, for the Holley oil pan. Right. Okay, so we got a windage tray. One bad thing about this Holley setup is the oil pan volume is less than stock. Now, there is a bunch of nice baffling and so on, and I have a race baffle for this setup. So hopefully we don't end up in an oil starvation situation. That's a accessory bracket. And there's some bolts in there. Oil cooler block off. Hardware, timing cover for Holley pan. So that's just all the bolts, and there's some little bracket stuff in there for this pan. So that there is a whole new timing cover for the Godzilla. Big cast aluminum part. Says Holley on it. So that is a new cast aluminum Holley oil pan for the Godzilla. And you can see there's a bunch of passages in here. Presumably that is the oil pickup. This will be a feed, I'm sure, oil pump feed. The oil pump probably connects up here on top. I'm sure it goes down and connects into here, and then these passages feed oil to the back of the pan. So it's, you know, got some passages and stuff in it. It's more than just a, you know, a straight pan. Drag race baffle. I'd say especially if you're going to use this Holley setup, because the oil capacity is actually less than on the stock Godzilla, you got to be a little bit worried about oil starvation. So here you got a race baffle. It's got doors which are going to open and close with gravity. Hear them rattle there. I'm sure it goes in like this, and the pickup goes inside there. And then if you slam on the brakes, these doors are going to close and stop the oil from all sloshing off the pickup. If you hit a radical left or right corner, you're going to find that the baffle on the requisite side closes and stops all the oil from sloshing out to the side. I don't remember what I paid for this, but pretty sure if you're going to do more than just putter around in like a pickup with one of these, you better have something like this. Now, like I said, Holley offers alternator, power steering pump, and I think there's even some kind of an AC compressor setup that they offer to go along with all this stuff. I bought the basic package, and it looks like they just use probably a GM style power steering pump. It looks like we should be able to make maybe even a Ford alternator work on them. Those accessories were insanely expensive. So we decided to leave those off initially. It's not really going to cost me any more to order them separately if it turns out that's what we got to have. But we're going to see if we can't piece together some of these parts from some other sources that'll cost less. This is a Godzilla cam phaser holding tool. So this is going to be something we need for our cam install. I've seen guys with a sort of jury rig setup to do it, but this is a special tool that's used to hold the Holley cam phaser in place while you put a lockout in it, or a limiter, as the case may be. Here's another little tool that you probably need. This is a Godzilla VCT phaser socket. This isn't the kind of stuff that's in any sort of regular set that you have. You better have this if you're going to do this job. Another special tool is this. This is a cam installation handle. I watched a guy on the internet install one of these cams by just holding on to the actual cam bolt jammed in the end of the cam. That seems like a good way to end up nicking your cam bearings. This cam is big and heavy, like a baseball bat. So you've got to have some control when you're fishing it into the engine. And this is the tool for it. Now, for like a 5.0 Mustang, I usually just use a piece of rod. But of course, the Godzilla cam has some goofy, fine metric thread on there where it's not that easy to go down to your favorite fastener place and just buy a big piece of threaded rod like that. It'll come in handy to play baseball later. Let's actually look at the cam. I decided to put one of these Tooley Racing Truck Norris cams in. It looks like this is going to work okay with my factory lifters. Everything looks like it should work okay with my factory rockers. It's not a super aggressive cam, but it will help quite a bit. And one of the things that this cam doesn't do is dramatically raise the RPM band of the engine. In my view, one of the things that goes wrong with these Godzillas is if you try to rev them too high. We need to try and keep this engine in the 6,000 RPM range, 662, something like that. If we can do that, then the factory bottom end is likely to be reliable. If we've got to start pushing it up, even 65, certainly up to 7, we're going to start to run into problems with the factory bottom end, and then we're into doing a whole pile of expensive work on the engine. And that starts to change the economics of the project to the stage where you wonder if we should even try a Godzilla. So this seems like one of the best approaches to getting a little more power out of the production engine without overstressing it too much. These Tooley guys are mainly in the Chevy LS world, but the Godzilla has a lot more analog with the Chevy LS than it does with any of the other current Ford engine offerings. So seems like Chevy LS guys might have this figured out. This isn't a packing slip. This little deal here is actually the cam phase limiter. So that's why we need some of these other tools. We're going to open the phaser up and we're going to drop this little deal in here, and it'll reduce the amount of rotation that it can do, still giving us variable camshaft, but not allowing it to get rotated so far over that we start to lose control. Okay, so there you go. There's a cam card here. The numbers I like are the at 50,000 duration numbers, 222 intake and 234 exhaust. This is a reasonable analog to something like the Trick Flow Stage 2 or the Comp 274 HR on the 5-liter Ford side in terms of duration. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Trick Flow Stage 2 is something like 224, 234 or 236. So that's pretty similar to that. You can expect it to sound a lot like that, like for instance the cam that's in my Mark 7. There's a 1.8 to 1 rocker ratio, 1.8. So your 5.0 uses a 1.6 normally. This is 1.8. Net lift at the intake, 641. Net lift at the exhaust, 644. That's a lot more lift than like a 5-liter cam like the Trickflow Stage 2 or the XE274HR. That's the kind of thing that's really going to make these cylinder heads work on this Godzilla, and that's where a lot of the power advantage is. Lobsep 110, max recommended engine RPM 6,400. They've included a handy VVT target table for this. That'll be helpful when it comes to programming the thing. And there's a timing chain orientation map on the back. If you know anything about these Godzillas, in order to get the lifters out of them, you actually have to take the cylinder heads off. Supposedly all we have to do is pull the timing set off the front, pull the rocker arms and push rods out of the engine. Then we can hook our cam install tool or just go off the bolt on the front and spin that cam over a few times. It'll pop the lifters up into the lifter bores, and then we can pull the old cam out and slide the new cam in, and away you go. Also, I will say, lobe wise, it doesn't look all that much different than like a Trickflow Stage 2 or a Comp 274HR. Got a fairly aggressive looking ramp rate. I'm pretty convinced this is a good cam for this application that's going to allow us to get the most out of the engine naturally aspirated without having to get into spending a whole pile of money on replacement parts. Stickers are most important. There is a set of 80 pound per hour Ford Racing injectors here. This is our gas pedal, and it is a gas pedal that would be used like in a Mustang. This says Holley LS fuel rails. This may be an exercise in how can you build a Mustang with a lot of GM type stuff in it that doesn't have GM power. There's some spacers, some little brackets, some hardware, some ORB to AN fittings, the rails themselves. These are not your sort of old style do-it-yourself Holley fuel rails where you gotta machine the injector bungs on them and whatnot. I have used that kind of stuff. My 9-second drag car has that kind of stuff on. These are like a ready to go, ready to bolt up, ready to plug your injectors right into kind of a rail with ORB fittings on the end. Those do-them-yourself kind of rails, you usually end up with an NPT to AN fitting on the end, and you got to be careful you don't get a leak there. Or you get somebody who's good with aluminum to weld them on. That's another way. But then if something goes wrong with the AN part of the fitting, you're in trouble. You got to use one of those AN fitting gaskets, if you've ever seen one of those. The engine that I bought, I got a little bit better deal on it because it came without fuel rails and injectors. Now, could I have used the factory fuel rails? Well, maybe, except for they create a bigger hood clearance problem where this is going to allow me to run the connector lines in front and in behind instead of up over the manifold. So I think I made the right choice that factory stuff wasn't going to be what we wanted anyway. This is a Maximum Motorsports manual brake conversion kit. We're pretty sure that this Godzilla is going to have clearance problems with a vacuum booster. So even though the engine will make vacuum to run vacuum brakes, it looks like a vacuum booster is not going to be a very good choice for this. The simplest approach is to convert it to manual. I'm going to get power steering in the car, but we're going to end up with manual brakes. Anyway, that's what that is, a manual brake conversion kit for the Mustang. Supposedly the balancer that came on my truck engine is not what's sort of termed the good balancer for the Godzilla, and there's a thin balancer and a thick balancer. This is the thick balancer. There's a new balancer bolt. Ridiculously heavy. Holy smokes. Thick balancer. So that is our new balancer, and you know, these Ford engines now are internally balanced, zero balance, which is sort of evidenced by the fact that there's no keyway. If you're used to Foxbody stuff, you know there's a keyway. There's no keyway in these. They can just go on any which way. Wow, that's heavy. MaxxECU engine management system. This is a Swedish system. This is some sort of ancillary wiring to go along with it. OBD2 connector, stuff like that. I've not used this system before. My friends at Western Motorsports, I think, are the first to get a Godzilla to run with it. It's a pretty sophisticated system, and price-wise, it's pretty reasonably priced compared to all the other options out there. The Terminator X Max is a way you can control a Godzilla, but the main advantage of this system is for certain transmissions, it can also run the transmission. If you decide you're going to use an electronic automatic or an electronically controlled transmission, like a DCT or something like that. I decided to give it a try. You're a little bit on your own with wiring it up. You got a wiring diagram. I got some information from my friends at Western. They, of course, have got one to work, so somehow or other, we're going to have to take and adapt all of this blunt end wiring harness stuff, all of this stuff, we're going to have to adapt up to the Godzilla harness. So that's a big job. It's probably the kind of thing we better do out on the bench, and I'm glad we've got a little help from our friends at WMS. Not like I probably couldn't figure this out myself, but this step may be one of the more advanced and troublesome steps in the whole install. Does come with a wideband oxygen sensor. The payday here, that's the PCM. So it's a nice compact factory looking PCM. It is not waterproof, so somehow or other we're going to have to find a way to get this in the cab, probably in the kick panel area. This is a big job, make no mistake, and it's not one I've worked with before, so everything on this MaxxECU setup is going to be a learning curve. Cross your fingers that I didn't make a stupid choice here. These are the headers. There's one set of headers for Godzilla swap in a Foxbody. As far as the actual exhaust is concerned, I don't really know what we're going to do. We're going to have to figure that out as we go along. Oh, I'm sure these are stainless, uncoated. I don't know what the origin of this flange is. It's possible it's something from Ford, or it's possible it's something that these guys make. It's got a bung in the collector for one oxygen sensor. How is this going to fit? I don't know. You can anticipate that this is the kind of thing that, you know, doesn't fit fantastic. It looks like somebody took the time in here to go around and, you know, burn the slag from welding this stuff out. I'm hopeful that these are going to be a good part. Now, I don't know, maybe I should take them and have them ceramic coated. Okay, here's an old speaker out of a Foxbody. That sticks to my steel door here pretty good. It doesn't stick to this at all. So, you know, the better grade of stainless, a magnet will not stick to. Obviously, that passes the magnet test. I don't know, I guess they are legit stainless steel. Really, they don't look like a bad header to me. I mean, you may wonder why a guy like me didn't ask too many questions about these headers up front. It's because there's one choice. There are no other choices. So either you buy these headers or you build your own. And building your own is prohibitively expensive, but it's about 1.85 inches at the flange. Let's try the OD on the tube. 2-inch primary OD. These are big tubes. This is kind of like the headers that are on my 9-second Foxbody. Now what about the collector? About 2.85 ID at the collector, and I'm sure these are like 3-inch. It's what you would normally call a 2-inch primary to 3-inch collector header. And you know, for this RPM range and the flow and everything on this engine, that's probably about the right size. That's the unbox of pretty much everything we need to get this engine put together and ready for the Mustang and to control it. Now, there are a couple of things missing. Like I said, the accessories, power steering pump, alternator. On top of that, you might have noticed there's no engine mounts. I don't really know what we're going to have to do to get the engine in this Foxbody. There's currently just one K-member that directly bolts up to a Godzilla, and that's from Team Z. That K-member, for whatever reason, is designed in a way that does not work with a power steering rack. So if you want power steering, and I think it's probably a good idea to have power steering, especially on a car that's going to be a little nose heavy like this, you're going to have to do a custom motor mount setup. Now, there are several options for custom motor mounts. The cheapest is Summit makes a mount setup, and all that is a plate with kind of a bushing setup welded onto it, a lot like the factory mounts are on a Godzilla. That bolts up to the block, and then there's tabs that you weld onto the chassis or a K-member or whatever in order to attach the engine to the K-member. Well, that may work, it may not work, it's completely non-adjustable. It's a reasonable price though, like in the 150 Canadian dollar range. There's also a sort of custom setup which uses billet aluminum plates. They bolt up to the engine, and then they've got several places that you can bolt the bushing onto, and also with tabs that you weld up to your K-member or your chassis, as the case may be. That system probably gives you a little bit more flexibility in where you can mount it, but it's something like 450 Canadian dollars. So, you know, all these things start to add up, and if you can shave a couple $100 off here and there, it does help with the overall cost of the project. I think our strategy is going to be, we'll get the engine prepped and ready to test fit, then we'll yank this engine and transmission out of bad decision, say goodbye to our stock configuration, maybe try and sell some of those pieces off, and we'll start looking at what it's going to take to actually mount the engine in the car. Then we'll make our final decision on the motor mounts. I have a strong suspicion that these kind of headers are never going to clear a factory K-member anyway, so we're probably going to have to buy an aftermarket K-member, but I want to get a look at what it'll look like with the stock K-member before we start tearing all that apart on the car, just to be sure that we can't just weld tabs onto the stock K-member. I'm going to put up a video here that YouTube thinks you'll like, and I'll probably put up a playlist for the Project Bad Decision so you can see everything that's been done to the car, where it's come from, and play along as to where it's going. If you get the chance, give me a like, subscribe, comment on the video. It really does help to get this video out to more people on YouTube. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.